You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Are you a private lands owner? And have you ever wondered, what are some of the mistakes that I need to avoid if I want to manage this piece of property the way I want it managed? Well, we're going to talk today with someone who can answer all those questions and more. He is John Gruchy, the private lands coordinator here at MDWFP.
Mississippi Outdoors is sponsored by Entergy Mississippi. Entergy is building a stronger and cleaner grid to power a brighter future and protect our great outdoors for generations to come.
You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. And today, John Gruchy, private lands coordinator here at MDWFP on the show. John, welcome to the show.
Man, glad to be here.
First time for everything. First time for you to be on the show, the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. But it won't be the first time that you will have discussed common mistakes you see from private landowners, right?
That's right. No, man, we, like I said, we've worked in the field with landowners now. We've had a private lands program for close to 20 years, and we see all kinds of stuff when we're working in the field. Sometimes, it's just harmless little errors, things that we can learn from, but sometimes they're big ticket mistakes. And so we've been asked before to put together a list and talk to others. And also, this is kind of the list of some of the most interesting mistakes we've seen from private landowners over the years.
I was thinking about it, getting ready to talk to you today. One of the ways this kind of thing has been talked about over the years is, an older person would say, like your granddad would say, listen, I'm giving you this advice so that you don't put the same knot on your head that I put on mine. Like I learned from it experience.
Oh yeah.
I want to teach it to someone else. So you don't have to go through that experience.
That's right. There's that. And then sometimes, we get taught, we make some nice little mistakes. I can think of a few myself. So, it's all in good fun, and good faith discussion.
So we'll get into that. Some of the common mistakes that, you and the staff have uncovered that you run into with private landowners, and it could be for one reason or another. Just before we jump into that, for context, for those listening, as private lands coordinator, MDWFP, kind of give me your background, how long you've been involved with that part of the department.
Sure, man. I started with the agency in 2007, and I've always been in the private lands program. I've been the coordinator since 2011. But before that, I was a graduate student under Craig Harper. Some people will know who that is. He was at University of Tennessee, and he's got he's an extension specialist like Bronson is here. And he's had a following for a while. He's a really, really good guy, interesting guy. And also worked at Tall Timbers Research Station. So I've worked with Bob White's in a lot of my career. And over the course of time, I've had to do a lot of deer work and a lot of turkey work as well.
So what, this will be year 14 as the
coordinator. Yeah. I'm coming up on almost 18 years with the agency. So that's It
grew up around Starkville, I thought I saw.
Yeah, I grew up outside of Starkville. I actually played football at Starkville High. I don't know if did you play with Barron Simpson when you were there?
I sure did.
Yeah, Barron was he was
you
my
were teammates with Barron.
Yeah. Barron and Edward Yates. I don't know.
Edward Yates, yes.
Bunch of those guys.
So you played you were a yellow jacket.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'll claim it.
That's great.
No, we're really proud of those years there. We were good for a while.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So and then went to Mississippi State initially.
Yes, sir. Yep. I went to Mississippi College for a little while, and then transferred to State. So.
And then a little bit of time at UT Knoxville, Tennessee.
UT in Knoxville. That's right.
Did they convert you into a volunteer?
Not at all. Not even a little bit.
Not even a little bit.
Yeah. No.
Okay, so we got the background, and so in those years as private lands program coordinator, you've run into things that you see are common mistakes.
Sure.
Let's jump into the list and kind of see what you have to tell us about it. Number one, I read it worded this way: act now, plan later. Now, what does that mean?
Yeah. So basically, one of the most common things we see is when we visit with landowners, and just to give you an idea of how this goes, landowners can request site visits through a bunch of different ways. They get on our website, or they can call into the office, whatever. We make contact with those landowners, go out and visit with them. And one of the first things we notice is people have been doing something already, right? They haven't just been sitting around. They're not like, what do I do?
Yeah.
And so a lot of people have just been doing what we would call like random acts of management. So they're going in and saying, you know, I bet I need this, or they've been inspired by something they saw on TV, or they talked to a buddy and they did it one way or the other or whatever. And the problem is that doesn't really string anything together towards a consistent goal. You know, if you think about it from a business plan standpoint, if you're just doing a whole bunch of random stuff, you know, and not moving the business forward, if you don't have a clear and concise goal, what's our product? What are we trying to produce here? What are we trying to make? Then you can end up wasting a lot of time and resources and things like that without having a clear plan or clear objectives. A good example is like, you know, we'll talk with people that have been working towards deer management and they don't know how many deer to kill. Oh, we're going to harvest, you know, X amount of does, or we're going to harvest bucks that we're only going to let, you know, we'll kill everything but 10 points, or we're going to do, we've worked with people that are just randomly putting food plot plantings. Every year they change, they see what's the biggest deer on the bag or whatever, planting, and just nothing really consistent. But the thing that we try to encourage people to do is have a clear goal, and that's a big part of what we do in that first site visit, is really talk through like what is your goal? Why do you own this property? And then we want to look at the limiting factors. So what biologically limits that property from being the best property it can be for your goals? And we want to make sure that everything we do is actually addressing those limiting factors.
So that first point, you see the mistake of act now, things have been done, but without a plan. What you're saying is skipping the planning phase first. It's an efficiency issue, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know, just wasting time, wasting resources. We all have, you know, finite time and resources. Some people more than others. Yeah. And even if you don't, you could do things that are harmful to your goal. Like, you know, we see people sometimes that are engaged, certainly from a deer management standpoint, like we just got through talking about harvest. You know, they're trying to cull out a certain genetic or something like that. I've seen people over harvest the buck segment of their population, trying to, you know, in the belief that they could take out a certain genetic component. That's just not going to happen. And then you're going to be, you're going to be down a few bucks, you know, later on. So
what did you call it? Random acts of management?
Yeah. Random acts of management.
RAM, like just random.
Yeah.
Random acts of
Why not, man? Just plow ahead, you know, go for it. But that's good. You know, the other side of that we've seen sometimes is the whole analysis paralysis thing we joke about.
Okay.
We've got landowners who can't kind of make up their mind sometimes. And I mean, again, sometimes these are important decisions. People want to kind of think about them and all that. But I've had landowners before that one particular comes to mind I worked with from the first year I was here, 15 years, worked with this landowner. He's passed away now, but man, every biologist that I know went to go see the guy. We had people from Mississippi State. He had consultants come in, and we all told him stuff to do, and he just couldn't make his mind up, couldn't move towards an objective. And, you know, I guess we all got time is a resource too, right?
Sure.
And so at some point you've got to commit, and you've got to, you know, full speed ahead at some point, right? So there's this balancing act between being efficient, planning, figuring out exactly what you want to do, and then the other side is planning too much to the point where you're just inactive.
Yeah, so there's like there's a good happy middle ground there. It seems like what you're talking about.
We hope. Yeah, no, I think so. I think it's a bigger middle than we think it is. You know, right? There's people just it comes down to an individual landowner's comfort level. I mean, it is stressful making some of these kinds of decisions. We do all have a kind of a fear of failure, right? I don't want to sink a bunch of resources or money into something and it not pan out. Sure. But at the same time, you don't want to overthink it and you know, lose time.
Well, but and side note, I would think for the landowner, the ability or the opportunity to talk with you or someone like you to, you know, work with that private land specialist that you can actually trust. Which if I own the land and you say, this is what I recommend, I can trust that.
Yeah, and we're not always right. You know, there's some
but
of these
in good
things,
faith, it's
in
right.
good faith. Yeah. So to give you an example, there are some things that science hasn't figured out yet. You know, people ask me questions, and I say, I guess right now we're looking at certain herbicides to control. We're trying to kill loblolly pine with different herbicides in different ways that haven't been done before, and I don't have science to back that up. So I can give you a good estimation of what I think is going to happen, and we try to do all that in good faith and say, look, you know, this is. I joke when we write reports. I say, I wish I could color code this. You know, when it's green, I got it. You know, when it's yellow, I'm guessing. When it gets red, we're gonna. You know, if I could color code it red, I'm making this up. You know, so just kidding. But basically, I think where we come into play a lot and where we can be helpful is helping people refine their goal in that initial point of contact, let them get started, and then be a resource that along that journey, they can hit us again and say, hey, I tried this and it worked, or I tried this and it didn't work. And then we kind of learn together. It's not like we have a right answer. Go see the doctor, write me a prescription. Here you go.
Yeah.
Don't call me again until you're well, or until you get sick again.
Sure.
It's more of one of those things where I think we can, have a rapport where we learn from one another.
Man, and what a valuable resource for the private landowner.
Sure. We like to think so. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is. You use the reference of like someone in business.
Sure.
I can look at it personally from that standpoint and think, yes, if you have, a mentor or an advisor
Sure.
that you trust, that he or she is an expert, and they say, listen, Matt, for your business, this is what you need to do. I would suggest this. This is the 1 year, this is the 3, and this is the 5.
Sure.
And if you can pull this off and stick to it, this is kind of to be able to trust that plan, like a game plan in football,
That's
like
right.
you and Barron used to go to Friday nights with.
Yeah.
You can trust it. You can kind of pin your ears back and go after it.
You would hope so, yeah. And then always know that we can pivot on that plan. And no plan
Sure.
is just written in stone. What did
Yeah.
I think? No plan. The military says no plan survives contact.
Halftime adjustments.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. I like halftime adjustments. I hadn't thought of that one.
Yeah.
But that's a good one. The other side of the plan that we talk about sometimes, though, along that vein, you can always pivot, but we don't want to have just the plan of convenience. I can't tell you how many times we work with a landowner, we develop a plan, we go here, and they go and stick the thing on the shelf, and they don't ever really come back to it. And they just, we don't want to have a plan that, for instance, again, sometimes we'll work with landowners, we do an assessment, and we say, look, you have too many deer on this property. You really need to reduce your density by half. And they go, thanks for coming. No thanks. We've got to be able to look, and of course we could be wrong, but we've got to be able to look and see, once we have a plan and once we've vetted that plan, you got to follow the plan to some degree if you want to get the results that you told us that's what you want.
Sure. So planning first. Don't waste a lot of time and energy on things you don't need to do.
That's right.
Being willing to take that first step and get started, and
Absolutely.
And avoiding the fear of failure at the beginning of it. Yeah. What about this? I think I'm pulling this from, I heard Jace Robertson say this on the Duck Dynasty podcast one time. And I don't even remember the context. I don't know if it was money or if it was ducks or what, but he uttered the phrase, you can't manage what you don't measure.
That's right.
And I thought, boy, isn't that true?
That's right.
Failure to monitor.
Yeah. So that's the other part of this. If we've got a plan, and again, you go with a business, you can talk about any aspect of life. We don't know if we're being successful until we have a metric to gauge that by. You have to have a point of reference. Have I done anything positive? With a business, it's pretty easy, right? It's profitability most of the time.
Right, yeah.
But with wildlife, we have to kind of structure that monitoring a little bit. So if the goal is to have, for instance, larger bucks, if the goal is to have more turkeys, we got to figure out how we're gonna. More is pretty right there. That's pretty nebulous. But how many am I starting with, and how much do I want to get to? What's my baseline, and what do I want to achieve? What kind of gains? A good example, personal trainer, right? I'm gonna, that's probably a bad example, but
Me too.
But basically, we know that we want to cut 20 pounds.
Yeah.
What I've got to have a progress report, right? What's my halfway look like? What do I look like 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now? That's the kind of thing we're talking about. And so the big aspects, there's all kinds of monitoring that landowners can do that we advise on. So DMAP is a big thing you've talked to people about, and that's just basically collect and harvest data. But we can also with deer do observation data where you're just keeping up with how many you see in each sit, and that's valuable data down the road. You can structure your cameras to where we can have that done more formally like a camera survey. And for turkeys, we have spring gobbler survey, which I think you probably have talked to Adam and others about. That spring gobbler hunter survey has actually been a really big resource for us. With bobwhites, you can even just do whistle counts. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we could talk about monitoring. We even talk about monitoring, keeping up with your soils, keeping up with exclusion cages in your food plots. So people say all the time, my food plots didn't grow. What happened? And we go, well, did you have a cage in there? Did the deer just eat everything up, or did it not come up? I don't know. I didn't have that exclusion cage. I wasn't monitoring. So, failure to monitor can be a pretty big problem. And the last thing I would say is for some of this, it's going to require individual landowners to increase their knowledge of the natural world, right? You're going to have to learn a few plants. You're going to have to learn how to collect data, and some of that stuff is intimidating. But man, I would encourage anybody, anytime you spend time learning again how to deal with deer data. If you're a deer person and you don't know how to pull a jawbone, if you just bear down and try to learn that over the course of a season, get good at it, that's going to be something that's going to be valuable to you later on. Learning your plants, learning in the summertime, learning flowering plants. We were talking before about even birds. I'm kind of a bird nerd, and I mean, I can listen to different bird communities and go, man, this probably needs to be burned because it's getting too thick. The bird context is off. So there's just all kinds of things that we can talk about monitoring.
It's pretty fascinating for someone like, and it's almost like I sense in everything that you're saying so far when you talk about mistakes with landowners that you've run into over the years that you help people to avoid. There's an element of you get out of it what you put into it. That's yes, from a resources standpoint, but also from a time and attention standpoint. That's kind of what you're talking about there. Sure.
And I think the important thing, we talk about this internally, and all these things go back to, them learning. And like you said, the getting out of it, what you put into it.
Yeah.
One of the mistakes that I made early on in my career was I tried to do everything for people. I said, man, I'm going to come in here, step out of the way. Let me burn this, or I'm going to show you exactly how to plant this the right way. And that's not very productive. What I've come to find is that over time, it works a lot better if we set the landowner up to be the hero.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I'm here to help you become a better naturalist, learn how to collect the data, learn how to manage. We'll write an initial plan, but after we do that for a little while, you're going to train your senses a little bit. You're going to be able to know when things are off. Like, oh man, my deer weights are off, or they're looking, and it just helps you kind of standardize your own observations and all that kind of stuff. So really everything we do, we're trying to set the landowner up. What's the saying, teach a man to fish,
yeah.
And the versus give a man a fish, that kind of thing. I mean, we call it technical guidance, and that's exactly what it is. It's just guidance. We're just giving information for people to kind of better themselves.
I know we've had a bunch of football references ever since I realized you were a Yellow Jacket at Starkville High School. But it's like a coach.
Yeah.
The best coaches realize that it doesn't matter if he knows what to do.
That's right.
The great coaches realize the players have to know what to do.
Yeah, and I would even go a step down. I would say we're like an assistant coach. We're like that O-line coach, the guy that just telling we're working on the basics, the fundamentals, and that kind of thing. We're definitely not. We don't want to preach at people ever. It's always about helping them meet their goals. So
that's great. What about this? And it says here, allowing economics to drive 100% of the decision.
Yeah.
What about that?
So that's a good one. So again, when we visit with landowners, by the time they've called us, they probably have some recreational interest. They're not going to call the wildlife department if they don't have some recreational interest. But there's plenty of people that we work with every day that own a property as an investment. Let's say you farm soybeans for a living, or you farm pine trees for a living. That land is how you make your living, and maybe you have wildlife as a secondary objective, something like that. And that's fine. We work all the time where we try to let wildlife habitat, how can we integrate it into a working farm? That's an important aspect of what we do and what wildlife management works with. But, a lot of times we'll visit with a landowner and they'll say, man, I own this place for recreation. And you say, what's the difference in a recreation investment? I had a landowner one time tell me a pretty funny one. He said, my wife can't understand why I pay a man to mow the yard so I can go to the farm to get on the tractor. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the difference in recreation and investment, right? You're doing this out of enjoyment. And so we'll work with landowners a lot of times that say this property is purely for recreation. And then we get to a point in the process where they start nickel and diming. And I don't mean to say that we're recommending economically unfeasible things that are too expensive. What we're talking about is, potentially harvesting timber that may be a few dollars off from what they're used to. I'm going to wait on the price. And it's like, man, you're letting this sit on a shelf at the expense of what you've told me was your most important goal, which is recreation. So, sometimes the idea of giving away pulpwood is a problem. We've had landowners that say they can't give up an acre of production, even though they tell me recreation is important. So we're trying to balance that. There's a lot of ways we can do that, and we'll talk about some of those later on. But basically, if we can't make some type of trade-offs, it's going to be at the expense of wildlife habitat.
Okay.
And so if you tell me wildlife habitat is your number one goal, we've got to figure out where does economics fit into that.
Right.
And so that's just part of that whole discussion.
Well, and so the flip side of that is,
Yeah.
You may have run into not considering the economics of it, and you run into that wall at some point down the road.
Absolutely. We've had landowners that you don't consider economics enough, and you paint yourself into a corner. So good, for instance, is if you're managing a stand of timber and you say, well, I want to thin this down to maybe I have a deer objective. Of course, if you have a bobwhite objective, maybe you are doing this with some intention. But I've got a deer objective, and I'm going to thin this way down, really low basal area. It's like, okay, well, you're never going to be able to come back into this. It's not going to be economically feasible for a logger to come in here. They're not going to make enough money to come back in to this really thin stand. Or we have people that do a timber harvest without planning, and they end up doing what we call maybe high grading a timber stand. And that reduces the long-term value of that timber. And then you're not making as much money as you could that you could be putting back into management on that property. I've seen another one that I see that's kind of funny to me on the economics thing, considering the long-term aspect of a property. If you own a property, why do you own it? Is it a legacy property? For instance, my family has land in Warren County that we'd never sell. That's a property that we want to keep in our family, or maybe you have an investment property. But I see people when they go to build facilities, they don't consider on the backside, what am I going to do with this facility? So I've seen people build like a $2 million lodge on a property. And they're like, okay, well, Ted Turner could buy this, if you ever put it up for sale. You don't want to paint yourself into a corner. Right. I got an 18-year-old son. I tell him all the time, the goal in any type of decision making is not to limit your options. It's not necessarily true for all decisions, but you want to be able to have options open. And if you don't consider the economics of how things are going to go short-term, long-term, you're going to eventually cut off some decision-making in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. You're saying there's not that many potential buyers for a $2 million lodge out there?
on 1,000 acres or whatever. It's like, okay, right. Let's, what are we going to do with this place? And that's joking, not joking.
Yeah,
what are we going to do 2 generations from now? How is the succession of this property going to do? The tax burden, the burden of management, maintaining, and all that. Those are economic considerations. Property succession is a huge deal. And those are just things that people sometimes don't consider. And if you don't at least factor that in, that actually will impact your wildlife management goals.
Okay. Talking common mistakes, potential mistakes that, private landowners might run into. What about infrastructure?
Yeah. So that's a good one. We talk about this one. And really, when I first started, I didn't understand very much about it until I started working with our WMA people. And what we talk about when we start talking about infrastructure is basically, I think people associate this now too with highways, roads, bridges, that kind of thing. That's exactly what we're talking about. Basically, the infrastructure network of a property is going to be how are we going to get from one end to the other, and then also your fixed assets. So things like a structure, like a water control structure, that would be infrastructure. Pipes, to be able to control the drainage. All those types of things are really important. Gates even are something people don't think a lot about. I've got people will call and say, oh man, we've got all this trespassing issue. And we ride right through the property. A gate? You can have a gate?
Yeah.
Somebody, whether they say gates keep honest people out, you got to at least keep them out, right? Let's at least keep the honest ones out.
Yeah.
So those are the types of things, if you can have infrastructure as being part of that plan that we keep talking about, build that into the plan to a little bit. One of the interesting things to me is I frequently go on people's property that don't even have access to every acre they own. It's like, man, you got 500 acres here, but you can't access 50 acres of it because there's a creek or something like this, or I don't have an easement. I don't know. You're paying property tax on land you can't get to, you can't hunt, you can't do anything. And so if we have a good road network, that adds management capability for logging. That adds to places where we can protect fire. If we had a wildfire on the property, what if somebody gets hurt, and you got to get them out from the back of the property.
Yeah.
So being able to have a good road network is a big deal. And there's no way to really fund that other than, you're going to have to come out of pocket. It's a capitalized expense. So the only way you would ever get that money back is if you sold the property, but at the same time, it increases your enjoyment and your ability to manage on the property. So
Sure.
it's a big deal.
You know, that's one that you almost never even hear it come up in conversation too.
Yeah.
When, you know, you yourself, or you talk with someone who's looking at a piece of
That's right.
property or a new place, you know, almost that doesn't come up very much, but when you frame it the way you just did, it's pretty doggone important.
Oh yeah. Well, it doesn't come up until it's a problem. Until
Right.
you know, it's like, you know, we got a bunch of rain come through, and you go, well, I want to hunt on this. Well, we can't get through that road. It's
Can
too
you go there?
No, sir. I want 365 roads. You know, we got, and I know that's expensive. Not everybody can do that. And again, when you work with the WMA folks, you know, our lands, that's a big deal for us. We've got to be able to get in case somebody gets hurt, things like that. And they spend a ton of their time on it. So I understand that it's a big deal for a landowner, but it's one of those things that it pays off.
Yeah. Evading invasives.
Yeah.
Say that 5 times fast.
Yeah.
Evading invasives.
I did
What
that to you on purpose. No.
I did okay. One shot at it.
No, you got it. So basically, same thing with infrastructure. There are some things that you can let linger. There are some things when you're managing a property that you go, and you, for us, I think about my health. You know, nobody cares about that they're overweight or anything till they bust through the emergency room door.
Yeah.
I guess, but that's a way to think about infrastructure and exotic plants. So when we start talking about invasives, we're talking about invasive plants and invasive animals, wild hogs. So if that's something you have on your property, it's not going to go anywhere. Those are things that came from somewhere else. They're not part of our natural ecosystem. Most of these plants came from Europe or Asia, and they're not just going to die. There's not just going to be some magical wand thing that happens, and in fact, they're probably going to get worse. We're probably going to have more things come in as landscapes become more altered, like when we change the hydrology or change the fire regime. That's going to make those plants worse. And in some cases, when we try to go in and fix something, so let's say you have Kogan grass is a good example on your property, and we go in and try to put fire back into a property, it's going to get worse. That's something that responds to fire. And so if we don't hammer that on the front end, if we don't identify that as part of our plan, like, look, I've got these invasive plants, Kogan grass, kudzu in North Mississippi. Yeah. If we don't address that on the front end, it's only going to get worse, and it's probably going to cost more money to sit on it. It's like the hole in the roof, right? If you don't address the hole in the roof head on, you know, it's probably going to be worse later on. And the problem with these invasive plants, as opposed to infrastructure, I think people can wrap their minds around it. The problem with these invasive plants and animals is that, you know, it's not right in your face. It's not one of those things. I mean, you know, occasionally it is. We'll have a wild hogs come in and destroy a big food plot or something like that. Or you have a invasive plant that comes in and takes over a road. The kudzu takes over a road. But for the most part, they're that slow boil, that thing where you don't realize it's going on, and then all of a sudden, oh man. So being able to identify those problems and then address them head on is a pretty important thing.
And being able to identify them.
Yeah. You got to be a little bit of a naturalist.
Part of it.
Yeah.
Which you are.
Yeah, sure. No, that's kind of part of going to the biologist school or whatever. A big part of it is not just botany, being able to identify plants, but understanding the ecology, the plant ecology, and the interactions with the soils and all that. We do a lot of that stuff. You know, talking about the economic side of it. There are soils on the property that are going to be better suited to do certain things than others. So one of the economic things that we talk with landowners about is we want to match the best species with the best site. So if you're planting trees, we want to make sure we put the right tree on the right site. If you're planting food plots, right tree, right site. And same thing with the invasive plants. There's never a site for it. We want to take it out. Okay,
so you mentioned in that example, that hypothetical example of certain soils, certain plants. You know, this type of tree needs to go here. What about that sort of knowledge when it runs up against someone who strictly is worried about what it's going to look like?
Yeah, aesthetics.
The aesthetics.
And so I call aesthetics all the time. I call it my unstated objective. Very seldom when we go to visit with the landowner, we get there on the property, very seldom does somebody say, the most important thing to me is for this property to look a certain way.
Okay.
And you can infer it. When we ride in and there's the white gates and the mowed lawns and all that, it's like, okay, this guy cares about how this place looks. We don't hear it on the front end until we go to do management. And then they go, I can't have my place looking like a bomb went off. I've heard that 100 times. We can't clear cut because it looks so ugly. And I'm like, well, that's kind of what it needed biologically, right? We have, or they'll say, I'll not forget, having a particular landowner who wanted to plant a certain type of tree that was off site. And he replanted them like 4 times, and I thought, man, I don't think the Lord wanted that to be there. I understand the aesthetics component of it, but the important thing to remember, I guess, is that if having a property look a certain way is important to you, that is important, but you got to understand that that's at some point going to come into contact with your wildlife management objectives. And what I mean there and what I tell landowners is if we can walk through any piece of the property in shorts and flip-flops, the cover is probably not good. If you're a deer or a turkey, there is hardly any kind of a cover type that is productive for you that looks like a literal park, with just nothing underneath, big trees. And so we have to do something to make cover, and sometimes that doesn't look good to people's eyes. Again, I tell people, if you've got to have it look a certain way, we'll have what we call the barn fringe. Have the mowed area right next to the house or next to the facilities. Get it clean and nice looking there. Keep the fences up and all that. I'm not saying it's got to look like nobody lives there, but if you've got a habitat objective, if you want big deer and turkeys, some of that's going to look a little rough, and particularly during certain times of the year or certain processes, we might have a 3 or 4 year process where we have to do a cut or kill some plants, and they're going to be brown and dead, and you're just going to have to kind of get over some amount of that. We'll do that on the backside. We won't do it in the front near the road.
Yeah. I was trying to think of a fishing parallel, and it's. Some of the best places to fish are not necessarily the best place to swim. No. And vice versa. Not, always, but that would be another way.
I always get tickled on the fishing stuff with the people that fish by all the boats and the docks and stuff. They're wearing them out. And it's like this pristine, like it's not the J. Crew or the LL Bean ad fishing spot, but it's like, you want to catch fish?
Build a boathouse, buy you a boat with big motor capable of, going 3 hours away to fish. And you're catching them right under the boat, under the boat dock.
I think it's pretty funny, but it's the same kind of deal there.
What about overlooking the value of Mother Nature?
Yeah. So that's one that several people, I kind of polled the staff for some of these questions, and I kind of overlooked that. I meant to say at the beginning, I talked to my staff. So we do have a staff right now we have 8 private lands biologists. And I will tell you, just kind of going off a little bit, they're some of the best folks that I've ever worked with in my career. I've supervised them, so I'm biased. But man, they're hardworking, and it's an honor to get to work with those folks and supervise them. But when I asked them, what are some of the big mistakes? One of the first ones that everybody brought up was the people that feel like they have to plant something, or they feel like they have to one of the big ones, I guess Houston, with the waterfowl, talked about people that feel like they have to plant corn. When in fact we have really good moist soil plants that are already available. And sometimes you're tilling up really good moist soil to plant corn. And it's like, man, yes, there's a time and a place for that, but maybe not all of it. And some other good examples, I guess we've had landowners that will mow down really good. I've seen before where we had really good cover. I'm driving in and it's just all bush hog, for instance, all mowed, and we get to one part and it's just really good, beautiful cover for bobwhites. And they say they got a bobwhite objective. And I go, man, why didn't more of it look like that? And they go, well, the bush hog broke. I didn't think that was any good. I thought that was terrible cover. I was like, no, man, that's the stuff we want. So,
which I'm jumping in, that kind of almost goes back to that initial stage of what you were talking about. The mistake of sometimes acting first and then planning later.
That's right. Or not being the naturalist to be able to identify some of those plants.
Sure.
Or the aesthetics thing. Some people get hung up. They all kind of start compounding after a period of time. But I guess with the natural plants thing, the real take home there is that these critters were around for a long time before we had fancy bags to put seed in or any of this kind of stuff. They have they're adapted to use the environments they're currently in. if we manage them to the best of our abilities. If we know what those animals need for what we call their life history strategy. If they can complete their life history strategy, before we got here, they were fine. All we've got to do is manage the land in accordance with your objectives. Of course, individual objectives come in, but they have the adaptations to use the natural plants. We don't have to bring, corn feeders in, and we don't have to bring in all this seed from other places. We don't have to have protein. We can make big deer and more turkeys and a lot of bobwhites without all these additions.
What about someone who, let's say they're in North Mississippi, and he says, well, my brother is down around Hattiesburg and he did this.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to do that, or I want to do that, or I tried to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Several times we'll hear this. It's pretty interesting, especially now, man, in the social media age. I guess you can get information from all over the place. People will see ideas, come up with things, and say, well, if that worked on this property, surely it's got to work here. And one of the things we would joke and call it the as seen on TV mistake. I got several things that I could tie to that, but basically we can't be impulsive on some of that. The other thing people will do is think, well, if I did a little bit of this, then maybe if I do a whole lot of it, it'll be that much more better.
If a little is good, then a lot.
More must be that much better. Mm-hmm. And that what they leave out of that equation, I guess, is the diversity aspect. So like we were talking about Mother Nature, most natural plant communities are incredibly diverse. And so when we see something be successful, we say, well, this one aspect, this planting this certain type of tree, or planting this certain food plot, or burning in a certain time of year, this worked out great. I'm going to do this everywhere. Like that doesn't always work out. If we go wall to wall with food plot planting, or go wall to wall with tree planting, is one of the ones that this kind of goes back into the planting discussion or the planting discussion. Several times we've gone onto people's property and they've maybe it's a 500 acre property and they clear cut 490 acres of it. And they say, what do I plant now? You kind of did it. You know what I mean? We're down to, not much flexibility. So, the key there is always keep diversity in your mind. Just because something worked in one spot or for one person, it may not work everywhere.
Everywhere. When I was little bitty, I was a little bitty guy. So I don't remember this. My dad tells the story that I was just talking and he was explaining to me about patience and being patient. And he said, you got to be patient. And he says that little me said, I am being patient now.
Being patient.
Meaning that I didn't still quite understand what patience was.
Oh, no. You gotta have patience with some of this stuff. We all, they're saying obviously patience is a virtue, but there are several things that we deal with in natural communities that take time. And so a great example is wild turkey populations. They tend to cycle, and they're going to cycle based on things that you didn't have anything to do with. It might be related to precipitation. It could be related to disease. Acorns, everybody wants to have maximum acorn production. Well, there's a cycle in that, right? There's precipitation, there's a weevil that gets in the oaks, all these kind of things cycle. And so we have to have a little bit of patience that some of these things take multiple years to come to fruit. Another example is deer management, man. There's a really great study that Steve Damaris and Bronson Strickland did, the genetics and environment study. And one of the cool things that we learned from that is there's a major lag in response to management. So basically they took, I don't want to go into the research, but we looked at the maternal effects. So if you have a doe that has a fawn that was in poor habitat conditions, it may take 2 generations for that to come out, for there to be and we kind of have a lag. That's on top of the natural lag in that it takes a breeding cycle or 2 for some of these things to come around, right? Yeah. So we got to have a hatch. We got to have a couple of fawns drop. We've got to have to be able to, and some of this may take 4 or 5 years. And so you've got to be able to be patient. And one of the folks said, don't look for one of my biologists said, don't try to find scapegoats to blame, immediately after that. And we decided chicken litter was a scapegoat, and predators and an idiot biologist. He said, it must be that dumb biologist. But anyway.
But patience, a little patience can go a long way.
Yeah, oh yeah.
In that regard. Yep. What about neighbors?
Yeah. So again, most of the time we visit a property, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard this. we go onto the property and tell them, what do you want to know? I want, big deer, more turkeys, whatever. And say, well, what do you think is holding you back? And they'll say, well, every time a deer walks across that fence, Larry shoots it. I can't believe it. You know what I mean? That taterhead. And then, you go down the road and you do a visit with Larry, and Larry says, man, let me tell you, the problem is Joe over there. Every time a deer crosses the fence, Joe shoots it. It's pretty funny. He's got these neighbors doing the Hatfield and McCoy thing. And they're, they never really talk across the fence, which is tough. But people are fairly quick to blame the neighbors. The reality of the situation is it's very rare that one neighbor is going to have an influence on a game population, especially when you consider the spatial scale that these things operate on. A buck home range is going to be at least 1,000 acres in most cases. A turkey home range is huge, 3,000 acres.
Wow.
And so, having just a few potential poor actors, immediately nearby may not be a big deal. The other thing that people get, and that's not to say people should be violating game laws, by the way. I just mean individual harvest management decisions. The other thing people get kind of caught up in that is it's like an arms race. They're like, well, I need to out food plot Joe or out feeder Joe so I can keep them all on my place. And that's not going to happen either. They're always going to have naturally occurring, big movements. So rather than getting hung up on fighting the neighbor, we would encourage, that's a big mistake. I would encourage people to talk across the fence. Why don't we work together with Joe or Larry? Yeah. Now that's easy to say, right? That doesn't, that's not always going to work out. But more times than not, I feel like talking across the fence is more productive than trying to, have an arms race.
As a biologist, how often do you have the opportunity to work with neighbors with adjoining property, and it's kind of all one big project?
I can tell you this, not as much as we want to.
Okay.
If that's one of the things that gets to be, I don't want to say frustrating, but what we really wish we could encourage is for us to put together kind of cooperatives. We really are pushing towards that. The problem with most of the things that go on, I just got through saying don't worry about the neighbor, that one neighbor, but you should be worried about your neighbors. What's my landscape? So one of the suggestions that people said talk about was, talk about how people don't take scale into effect. And that's what we were getting at with these large home range sizes. So if we can get groups of neighbors to work together, and sometimes that does happen. We've had prescribed burn associations have been one of the newer things that's been very interesting. But deer co-ops, man, we had deer co-ops going way back. Back in the day, they used to have county conservation leagues. This was back when they were restocking animals, and the conservation league would get together and say, we're going to dress up this one place, or we're going to stop. They kind of self-policed, or whatever you want to have it. And those groups really were really important for people like myself to be able to go in and try to influence the whole landscape around a population of wildlife. And so we would really encourage people, again, rather than fighting the neighbor, try to get together with neighbors, a bunch of folks, and try to have cooperatives, county co-ops. And sometimes we've been able to help manage that. But if we do that, we get, instead of getting deer data on one property that may be 1,000 acres, 500 acres, we can get deer data on a landscape. I've got a co-op right now in Yazoo County that's 10,000 acres. We've got co-ops before that were, when I first started, there was a co-op in Kimber County that was 25,000 acres. There's those big landowner cooperatives are really the best way for us to manage an entire population, or the only way. And
someone listening to this podcast, John, and they're thinking, can I just call this guy? Can I talk? So what do they do? How do they get hold of you?
Man, the easiest thing for landowners to do is to get on our website, MDWFP.com. And if you look, there's going to be under wildlife, the wildlife tab, there will be a place where it says private lands program and request a site visit. So we have it set up just like you're requesting help from anything. It's on the website. We do ask people to give us, obviously their name and address, but we ask you to draw a map of the property just so that before we get out there, we can be fully prepared for the visit. You can also get to that website by going to mdwfp.com/private lands, all one word. Okay. And if you get to that website, you can request a site visit there. Another way is to call the office. So they can call 601-432-2199, and we can, they can request a site visit that way. But in general, it depends on the time of year. Right now, we're kind of slow, but we are very busy in the fall. And so sometimes it'll take, a couple of weeks for us to be able to get out there in the fall. But usually in the winter, the summer, we can turn it around pretty quick.
And the staff, you and the staff, what kind of size? How many people are we talking about?
Yeah. It's roughly, so we have a total of 9 people, including myself, in the private lands program. But we also lean on heavily our species program folks. So we're small game biologists, Rick Hamrick. The waterfowl guys help us with a lot of the waterfowl visits because they are pretty specialized. And then, of course, we've worked with the deer program. And I, against my better judgment, sometimes I will work with a black bear biologist. I'm just pick on Anthony all the time.
Yeah.
But so we tie in 6 or 8 of us. And then the big thing, one of the things we tell landowners all the time is we're just one aspect of this. And there's not a whole lot that we can do in terms of a lot of stuff. We try to be just one part of that team that a landowner works with. And so we'll refer them to Mississippi State Extension, for instance, or we'll refer them to NRCS, the USDA NRCS. They actually have some capabilities we don't have. The Mississippi Forestry Commission, they have their own prescribed burn teams and crews that can burn or help plant trees and things like that. So it's just one aspect of the whole big picture of land management.
Yeah. Really cool. Fascinating.
Yeah.
And, it's about an hour show or so here, but I have the feeling we could go on and on and on if we wanted to.
There's potential. I'd play out eventually. No.
Or we'd have to get a refill of coffee and call an
Yeah.
intermission. But it's been fascinating. It's great to meet you. Great to talk to you, John.
Yes, sir.
Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, man, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
He is John Gruchy, the Private Lands Program Coordinator here at MDWFP. We appreciate you listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast, and we'll see you outdoors.